today we are going to be jumping into dietary principle number 2 from the Weston A Price Foundation, and what I consider to be some of the best advice for real nutrition here in 2025 when we are bombarded with so many different nutrition paradigms, maybe conflicting information, all different things. Weston A Price, I feel like, is some of the most grounded nutrition advice that we can find because it is based in traditional cultures that have been around. And if you've been following this channel for any amount of time, then you know that I love anything that is rooted in biblical principles. Now, traditional is not the same as biblical. I will be the first to admit that, but I kind of addressed that a little bit in the very first video that I did. And I really do feel like this is how we were created to be eating. And so I love to share that information here. And if you missed the first video and want that little bit of intro and start at the beginning with dietary principle number 1, then be sure to check that out. I have started a playlist for you here so that it is nice and easy for you to find. Okay, without further ado, let's jump on in. Dietary principle number 2 of the 11 Wise Tradition Principles is to include animal foods. I know this one for some people is really hard to get past, but all traditional cultures consumed some sort of animal food, such as I am tongue-tied, such as fish and shellfish, land and waterfowl, land and sea mammals, eggs, milk and milk products, reptiles and insects. The whole animal is consumed when consuming them in traditional cultures. Muscle meat, organs, bones, and fat, with the organ meats and fats preferred. So let's dive in a little bit to that. But just as a reminder, if you missed the first video or if you forgot, this is all information that is coming from the Weston A Price Foundation 11 Dietary Principles, Wise Traditions booklet, and you can find this on the Weston A Price Foundation website, westonaprice.org. So this was actually Dr. Price's biggest disappointment. When he was doing his research, he was looking for a traditional culture, maybe an isolated tribe somewhere, somebody that survived totally, not just survived, thrived on all plant foods without any animal products. And the reality is he did not find a single one. What he found was that every culture consumed some sort of animal product, whether that was the insects, whether it was milk products, dairy, being incorporated into things. It might be a cultured cheese, it might be a kefir or something similar, but there was some sort of animal product. It may have even been insects that were consumed inside of the rice, because sometimes that happened, like the grains when they were harvested. Today, if you buy conventional rice, which I don't recommend, but conventional rice is usually fumigated, so there's no insects left in there. If you're buying your whole grains organically grown, then those have not been treated. And so if you've stored bulk foods of any kind, an important step for grains is to either freeze them or use some sort of diatomaceous earth, because there's insect eggs in there and those will hatch. And they're actually good for you to eat when they are really tiny and you can't find them. Like, that's okay. You just don't want them hatching and then consuming your grain. So that's why we freeze them or use diatomaceous earth, so that doesn't become a problem and all of your bulk goods are ruined. But you're consuming some animal products even when you're consuming some plant foods. Does that make sense? So one of the important points to remember that is pointed out in this booklet, and I love, it's super important, is that animal foods were always traditionally consumed with the fat. So we're not talking about boneless, skinless chicken breast. You're not talking about egg whites without the yolks or anything like that. The entire fat was consumed with the meat. So you're getting milk with its cream. Skim milk's not a thing, you guys. 2%, 1%, we were never created to consume milk in that fashion. That's only able to be done industrialized. Even when you skim cream off the milk, if you have fresh milk, you're not getting the equivalent of 2% or 1%. That is so industrialized. it's not able to be done in a home kitchen. And so we are not intended to be consuming that. And when we do, problems arise. So I thought it was very interesting in here that Native Americans used to refer to overconsumption of lean protein as rabbit starvation. So this is something like rabbits, like bunny rabbits, not rabid. I realize that could come across different, but rabbit starvation. And that would be if you were consuming just lean meats without the fat on it, then it does cause problems within the body because the fat actually helps with digestion. So we don't want to be doing just egg whites. You don't want to be consuming just all of your lean meats, which was such a trend for so many years, right? But rightly so, we're coming away from that because it has not actually resulted in any sort of improved health. We're seeing bigger, more chronic issues. And they dive deeper into the information with that here in the booklet. I'm not going to go in all the way into depth because I want to move on to some of the nutrients that are not found in your plant foods, things like vitamin A, that we hear a lot of it being talked about, like, oh, carrots are high in vitamin A, or even one of my absolute favorite Young Living products, Ningxia Red, the Ningxia Wolfberry, is something that is traditionally said to have a lot of vitamin A. The reality is, now I gotta take a drink of this. The reality is that the vitamin A does not actually exist in those plant foods. You're getting carotenes and carotenoids, which are precursors to vitamin A, but that's work your body has to do to convert them into vitamin A. Animal foods, a lot of them already have vitamin A in them that's ready for your body without having to convert it, so it's a lot easier to be absorbed. Things like vitamin K2 and honestly complete proteins and DHA, I'm just gonna say AA, I'm just kidding. Arachidonic acid, I believe that's right, arachidonic acid. It's an omega-6 fatty acid, and it is found in animal fats and organ meats. And so we need these kind of nutrients that you just simply can't get from plant foods. There's a lot of politically motivated studies that have been promoted in, I would say recent years, but really probably the last 20 years, especially when I've heard them, that really inspire plant-based foods that are not actually grounded in real research or real science. One of those being the China study. And friend, if that's something that you have read, or it can be kind of scary if you've read it, right? You're like, oh no, these foods are linked to cancers and all that kind of thing. Except that wasn't a real study, and it cherry-picked information and created a conclusion that's not from actual research that was well done and properly performed. So we have to keep those things in mind. Just because something's really popular and we're hearing a lot about it doesn't necessarily mean it's accurate. And one of the things that I love, by the way, those nutrients I listed were just a couple of them. There's several pages that touch on all the different nutrients found in animal foods that you can't find in plant foods. But we have to remember that traditional cultures and tribes and people groups that have been doing these things for centuries weren't having those results. If you remember Dr. Price's research, one of the things he was fascinated about was that these tribes that he was looking at had none of the physical degeneration that he was seeing here in the United States, and that was back like in the 30s. So it's super important. They had all of their teeth unless they had lost them from an injury, right? They weren't getting dental care, but they had great dental health. He was a dentist. That was the first thing he looked at. And then they weren't seeing the degeneration that we see over here in our very sophisticated, quote unquote, nutrition information and diets. So I'd love to go back to a lot of those principles, and that is dietary principle number 2. We're going to leave that there for today. Next time when we cover this, we'll go on to dietary principle number 3. It won't be my next video, but on the next video that I do in this series, that will go in there. And until next time, thank you so much for taking the time to join me today. Take care, friends. Cheers.